again to The Actor's Vow. This is Denise Paratrapat. I'm so excited for this episode because it's about one of my favorite things in the acting world, and that is stage combat. I don't have a lot of updates in my life. I've literally this past week just been working for things for the Actor's Vow on TikTok, Instagram, and many cool things that are coming very, very soon. When I say very, very soon, it's in a few months. Also, a reminder, Sunday Spotlight is taking a break. It's not gone forever, so I'm still taking some submissions. There's like a couple spots left, so you can do that on the Instagram of the Actor's Vow and the link in bio. But other than that, I want to go straight to introducing our amazing guest today. Our guest today is Taylor Hohman, who talked to us from a vacation in the Bahamas, which was amazing. So thank you, Taylor, for taking your time to talking to us during your vacation time. But I loved having Taylor over because Taylor, he was born in Kentucky and he grew up performing with the Lexington Children's Theater. He was a child actor. And then he went to school here in the US. He got his BA in theater arts at Catawba College in North Carolina. You know, he didn't go to New York, he didn't go to LA, but then he went to Tuscany, to Italy, and he decided to study Commedia Dell'Arte. He also got his MFA in physical theater from the Accademia dell'Arte in Arezzo, Italy, and he focused on stage combat in Commedia dell'Arte in it, which is what we're going to be talking about in this episode. Taylor is incredible at stage combat. He's an advanced actor combatant. For those of you who don't know what all of this is, we're going to talk about it in the episode. He's also a certified teacher with the British Academy of Stage and Screen Combat. That is the British equivalent of the SAFD we have here in America, the Society of American Fight Directors. And he just completed his second consecutive term as vice president of the British Academy of Stage and Screen Combat. He has written several articles. One of them was on Capitano and the Spanish Rapier, and it was published on the Society of American Fight Directors, the Fight Master. If you don't subscribe to it, I recommend you do. I love the Fight Master. It's really cool. If you're into stage combat, they have very cool issues with interviews and articles. And Taylor, other than stage combat and studying in Italy and being now in Europe, he has performed as an actor and a combatant for stage and screen in the US, the UK, Italy, France, Germany, Russia, and is currently a performer and business manager of Flights of Angels Shakespeare Company in Arezzo, as well as a member of the independent drama fight team in London, England. So he's been doing a lot of stuff both in the US and outside the US. I think it's so exciting to have someone who has worked internationally. So many times we think, if you don't study in New York or LA, like that's it. Like you can't be an actor. And there are so many options out there. And I love that about Taylor. He shows us how many options you have if you want to be an actor and how many things you can do with your acting degree, and even if you don't have a degree, how many things you can do as an actor. Taylor, fun fact, is also a certified sommelier with the Wine Spirit and Education Trust. He also loves eating, and I think that's why he decided to stay in Italy, because the food there is amazing. And he's always posting these amazing pictures of food and wine, making me very jealous. But I don't think he needs further introduction. I'm very excited for you to hear this conversation. So let's welcome Taylor Hohman to the Actor's Vow. Welcome, Taylor, to the Actor's Vow. It's so great to have you here today.
It's so great to be here virtually.
Yes. So my first question for you is, what made you want to be an actor?
So I'm an only child, and I was actually homeschooled.
Wow. Okay.
Until I went to university, basically.
Wow.
So I pass a lot of my time with my boxes of costumes. Running around in my backyard, playing medieval knights and cowboys and samurai and whatever else. And my parents had signed me up for a lot of sports, and I was not good at all at sports. But there was a local theater in my hometown with professional theater, Lexington Children's Theater. It's actually one of the top children's theaters in the United States. And I started going there and auditioning for them when I took classes there as a kid, as like a 6-7-year-old.
Uh-huh.
and then started auditioning for shows for them when I was about 9, and started getting cast and got cast a lot because I was homeschooled, because they were doing shows for schools. So I
Uh-huh.
didn't have to miss school to be in the show.
Right.
So they started casting me a lot as a kid. And then they started, as I got older, they started casting me more in just the like full on perfect, because they had two types. They had the shows where they cast kids in them, and then they had just the professional actor shows. But they
Mm.
started casting me in just the professional shows as well, because I could rehearse during the day.
Nice. Nice. Yeah.
So that was where I grew up doing theater. And so when it came time to go to college, it was like, well, I'm going to do theater because that's what I'm good at and what I know how to do and what I
Wow.
love. And it worked out well, because then when I started auditioning for theater programs, they would look at my resume and they were like, all your experience is professional. I was like, yep,
Right.
that's the only thing I know how to do. So
And your family was supportive.
they were. My parents are pretty supportive, pretty great about that. My father worked casually in theater production for a while.
Oh.
So he knew that world. And my mother's big on stories and reading and things. So just the embodiment of stories on stage was
Mhm.
something she could comprehend. So they were both very supportive of that, which was great.
That's great. Yeah. That's very cool. We do have a lot of common in our story. I was also not
Yeah.
a child, also did theater with adults as a child. Yeah. That's great. So, okay, I have to say that I was looking at your whole story and your resume is very cool. Like, not
Thanks.
just as an actor, like you've also been a professional brewer, a bicycle tour guide, a bodyguard, and you're a wine sommelier. And I'm like, wow, this is such an unconventional journey for an actor. And I love that because, many of us, it's like, well, if you're not in New York or LA, you can't be successful as an actor. So yeah, it's very cool. I wanted to tell you that.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Well, I mean, that's one of the things I like the most about theater and acting, is that you get
Mhm.
to learn about, we're so used to getting a script and I'm going to learn about this thing. If you get a
Yes.
period piece, you should go learn about the period. If you're doing something modern, you learn about whatever. And so that actually, it's a never ending journey of learning.
Yes.
And then when you find other opportunities, because we're all actors, we all have another job. I mean,
Yeah.
let's be honest. But you've learned stuff, and so you can say, "Oh yeah, I know about this because X, Y, and Z," and they go, "Oh, okay, come on in."
Absolutely. I think actors like to do many things because we learn from every role we do, right? So
Absolutely.
you studied theater, your BFA in the US,
Yeah,
but then
BA. I can't
BA.
claim that. I can't claim that F. I don't want to get in trouble.
Okay.
At Catawba College in North Carolina. Yeah, it was a
Okay.
small school, private liberal arts, but a very conservatory style program. So I didn't sleep the whole time I was in undergrad. Like, it was like class all day, work in the theater afternoon, grab something to eat, come back for rehearsal, go home, do homework, repeat.
I feel you. Same.
Yeah,
But that's what we love, right? Like
yeah.
that is great.
Although I've never worked that hard since. All
Same.
my professors are like, wait till you get out in the real world. And then I got out in the real world. I'm like, this is a breeze. What are you
Yeah, I
talking
have
about?
so much free time compared to that. Yeah, absolutely. And then you went from the US to Italy.
Yeah. So my last year in university,
Mhm.
when everyone's like, what am I going to do now?
Right.
There, we just got an email about this performing arts conservatory in Italy called the Accademia dell'Arte, and it's
Mm.
in Arezzo, which is in Tuscany, about an hour south of Florence.
Uh-huh, yeah.
If you've ever seen Life is Beautiful with Roberto
Yes.
Benigni, yeah,
Yes.
that's where it takes place.
Oh,
Um, so, and it's in this lovely Medici villa on the hillsides outside of town in Tuscany.
wow.
And
So
they were,
beautiful.
yeah, and they were at the time very focused on Commedia Dell'Arte, mask theater. And I
Mm.
thought, that's cool, because I'd already started doing stage combat and really enjoyed that physical element
Uh-huh.
to acting, because my undergrad was very Stanislavski based. So it was,
Yes.
psychoanalyze your character, do your text analysis, your beat breakdowns,
Like everything else in the US.
like everything
Yeah.
is in the US. And so I often had I would go to the costumers. I used to drive the costumers in college nuts because I would go to them like the first week of rehearsal and be like, what am I wearing? And they're like, well, it's not built yet. Oh, okay. Do you have something like what I'm going to be
Yeah.
wearing? Because I don't know how to walk.
This is important. Yeah.
So I know what my character's thinking about. I know what my character's had for breakfast,
Right.
but I don't know how he walks across a room. So
Yeah.
can I have the shoes and a coat or something?
Uh,
And stage combat was one of those things where the beat breakdown was in the choreography and the action. And so you could find this physical embodiment through the fighting. And so I was like, okay, well, that's great, but there has to be some way to do that or learn how to do that.
yeah.
And so going to a European conservatory and studying much more physical theater forms seemed like to me a logical next step. Plus, Tuscany, who doesn't want to live in Tuscany?
Did you know Italian? Was that a barrier, a problem?
No, I learned it when I got there.
Okay.
Which was,
How was that?
I mean, it's like your story, it's like I took some classes and then I got there and then I was like, well, we'll figure it out. Actually, I like what you said in your story about what ignorance plus naivete equals bravery.
Yes. Yeah.
That's exactly like looking back now, I'm like, what was I thinking?
Right.
But I didn't
Find yourself in a situation and you have to.
Yeah, and Arezzo's great because it's not very touristy. They have their own kind of dialect, but not like they do in places like Calabria or Sicily or wherever, where it's like a whole other language that runs parallel to Italian. So because it wasn't very touristy, and because everyone's local dialect was more or less regular Italian, I was able to just go out and make a fool of myself on a regular basis, but make local friends, and
that's really cool.
So, yeah.
Well, I want to go back to physical training and stage combat in a little bit, but then when you graduated, you stayed in Italy.
Yeah, I didn't leave.
Was that your first plan, or did you just want to go study and then come back to the US?
I kind of knew. I traveled a lot growing up, being homeschooled. My father traveled a lot for business, and my mother was a housewife. So if Dad was going to be on the road a lot, he was like, "Why don't you two just come with me? I've got 2 weeks of country hopping in Europe. Just come with me, rather than being separated from his family for 2 weeks." So I kind of got used to going to Europe every year. Went to Latin America, went to Asia, whatever, and so I was quite comfortable with Europe and liked the European lifestyle. And in college, I did wine tastings, and then cooking and made fresh pasta and all kinds of ridiculous, which most 20-year-old kids don't do. But so the idea of going to Europe and staying there, it wasn't like I'm going here, I'm going to do this, but it was I went, I studied, stayed, tumbled into an English teaching job, and then after getting my master's, it was like I'd been there for 6 years. This is home now. I live here, so So I've been there for 15 years.
Wow.
So the majority of my adult life. At this point.
Wow. I want to know if you would recommend, college students, acting students here in America to go to study in Europe, and what are your best tips for that?
So absolutely, because as you said, a lot of, maybe it's different now, but many of the undergraduate theater programs in the US are very similar.
Yes, they are. Yeah.
And when I auditioned around the different programs and they all explained to me how their program worked, it was kind of like, well, that sounds exactly the same.
They're all the same, just different teachers. Yes.
Different teachers, and then they have their different connections to wherever for when you get out. So I was, absolutely. Go to Europe. You don't have to move there for 15 years. Don't necessarily recommend that. It's worked out for me. But 3 months, a year. And in addition, I actually wrote a piece for the Southeastern Theater Conference magazine a few years ago, just about study abroad in general, where you go and you learn about another culture and you learn about whatever you've gone there to study. But you also learn a heck of a lot about yourself and where you come from. And I'm sure you have the exact same
Oh,
experience.
yes.
You go, what does it mean to be American, or what does it mean to be Spanish? What does it mean to be from Kentucky? What does it mean to be from Catalonia?
Hmm.
And you're actually suddenly, you become much more self-aware
Absolutely.
of who you are and what makes you you, and then you can articulate that better, but also step back and be like, what were some of my unconscious prejudices?
Yes, yes, yes. And it's getting out of your comfort zone, which I think for anybody, but especially an actor, we need to do that.
Yeah, and go to a country where you don't speak the language, because then I mean, improvisation and learning, how to survive on a day-to-day basis, things in
Yes.
Italy are very different. If
Mhm.
you forgot to buy toilet paper Saturday night, Sunday's a long day because nothing is open. You
Yes,
can't,
yes.
and that's just how it is.
True.
Everything's closed from 1 to 4. Which we're in
Yeah,
America, and everything closes at 7:30. So you just like learn
right.
to adapt, and those are skill sets that you're just going to apply across the board.
Yeah, and you
Every,
learn to figure it out, being alone, being without what you know. Yes.
and it's the same. I grew up mostly doing stage, and then I started doing more film stuff when I came
Mhm.
here, and it was a very parallel scenario. It's like, well, I kind of know what's going on, but it's really different.
It is. Yes, yes. When I moved from New York to LA, it was completely different experience. Like in school, they tell you, well, if you know how to act for stage, it's gonna be fine in screen, but it's a completely different world.
And it is, and no one teaches you how to act. Nobody act, like behave. I mean,
Yes, yes. On set,
and
yeah.
I think I was listening to the Actrepreneur episode you did,
Hmm.
and she was like, "Bring a book," and like I learned that very quickly because I was just doing fights, so I was like zombie number 2 or bad guy with a sword number 5,
Hmm.
and they stick you in a room. They're like, "We're doing the acting scenes now. We'll do the fights later," and you run the fights a handful of times, and you don't want to get tired. So then
Yes.
it's like, I'm gonna sit in the corner and read my book. Somebody will come, and I brought my own sandwich because there's nothing to eat. And then
Hmm.
somebody will come get me, and like that's something that no one teaches you.
No, 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 no. They really don't. Well, so let's go to physical theater now.
Sure. Okay.
The first guest that I had was Jamie Ann Devlin, and she actually studied physical theater in London, and she's the one who taught me in New York. She then went back to the US. And so we've talked about it in the podcast, but I wanted to know your experience and like how do you think that has affected your acting or helped your acting?
So the program I did at the Accademia dell'Arte, which is a MFA in physical theater,
Hmm.
um, dance, vocal,
Wow.
vocal skills, neutral mask. Actually, there was a lot of, I don't know how much you're familiar with Jacques Lecoq.
Oh, yes, yes.
Yeah,
Love Jack
but
Lecoq. Yes.
right, there was a lot of that influence. It's not a Lecoq school,
Okay.
but a lot of the teachers who worked with us had come to that school
Mm,
or from that tradition
got it.
anyway. Um, and so there was a lot of those elements. And then just Commedia dell'Arte, neutral mask,
Mm,
um, and then we did 6 weeks at a circus school in Torino. We did contemporary mask in Berlin,
wow.
and then we created a original theater piece based on Don Quixote in Milan for our
That's
final
awesome.
project. So yeah, you learn how to act with your body and not just your
Hmm.
voice. And
Yeah.
working with comedic mask or neutral mask, like having your facial expressions taken away, but still having to communicate
Yes.
to the audience. And then a lot of the times, the audiences we had in house didn't speak English. Uh,
Hmm.
so it was like, and a lot of the students were American. It's a very American centric school. It's a
Oh,
very
okay.
study abroad centric school, although students do come from Europe.
So did you do productions in English?
Yeah.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And sometimes we did them in Italian. Sometimes people sometimes just acted in their native language. Mostly it was English, but sometimes you had French speakers, sometimes you had Italian speakers.
Hmm.
Um, but the audiences were always Italian speakers, so it was like
Right.
that extra onus of we can't just get up and say the line. Like
Yeah.
we have to really be telling this story with our whole self on stage, and that, as far as any actor training, is crucial.
Yes.
and something that was entirely lacking from my upbringing, which is not to say that I didn't have good education before that. I think
Hmm.
it's something that's lacking in the US.
Yes, absolutely. Lacking is the word. I don't think it's one or the other. You know, sometimes it's like you have to put them together. If you just have
Yeah.
the psychological training, then you lack on physical. And you see so many actors here in the US who just don't know how to move or express that on stage. And also, I think it's a much safer approach. That's on my opinion. Like from the
Mhm.
outside to the inside, than starting with all this, you know, method acting, psychological thing that can lead you to a very dark place. So,
Yes,
yeah.
absolutely. And that one of the most significant acting experiences I had living
Mm,
in Europe was I got hired by a French Baroque music ensemble
that's so cool.
to go perform Commedia characters between the pieces, because the theme that they do a festival, and that festival was Italian Baroque composers. So they
Mm.
said, well, it'd be cool to have someone come do Commedia, and somehow they found me. So I got costumes and flew up to the middle of nowhere in Normandy, and they were like, "All right, we want you to perform in French." I said, "Okay, I can like order in restaurants
Okay,
in French, and I can buy wine in French.
that's about it.
That's about it." And they said, "Well, can you do it in Italian?" I said, "Sure."
Mm.
So I wound up doing these like monologues in these characters. I was doing Arlecchino, Pantalone.
Mm.
Those are the main ones. In a courtyard in a medieval villa in the countryside of Normandy in front of a Baroque ensemble to French people.
Mm.
So I'm on stage jumping around, and just in my head, I'm like, I am from Kentucky. I'm performing in Italian to French people. This is absurd.
It
Like,
is.
but it really was on me to be like, they have to know what's going on. They have to
Yeah.
know the story, that we were trying to tell that went along with the music that was being performed. And they laughed in the right places, and then they got it.
Yeah, that is so cool. I mean, this just comes to show what I was saying, you know, it's not just New York or LA. Like there's so many places, so many possibilities when you graduate, when you're an actor. People tell you, well, if you're not going to be a famous actor, why are you doing it? There's so many things you can do.
Yeah, absolutely,
Yeah.
100%.
I love it. So then stage combat, that's a big part of your life. You
It is.
are an advanced actor combatant and a certified teacher, right? By
Yes.
the British Academy of Stage and Screen Combat.
Yes, that's
Okay, got
correct.
it. Yeah, I am certified with the SAFD. I've never worked with the British Academy, although I'd love to. So for the people who are listening who might not know what these organizations do, could you explain?
So, stage combat, the way I define stage combat,
Hmm.
there's not an official description as far as I'm aware, but
Okay.
it's the craft of telling the story of dramatic violence on stage.
Hmm.
And I started with the SAFT. I went to NSCW, National Stage Combat Workshop,
Hmm.
in 2004, and then moved to Italy in 2005. And Britain is clearly a lot closer to Italy
Yes.
than the US is.
Yeah.
So I started training with the BASSC, and they have very similar methodologies. And many of our teachers are also teachers with the SAFD, and we have a couple of, like Scott Mann, if he's still the SAFD president, he's one of our certified
Oh,
teachers in the
okay.
BASSC. Mark Gwynn, John McFarland is a master teacher with the BASSC, and he's on the executive committee as well. So
Hmm.
we have a lot of overlap. And we recognize each other's certifications. So
Yeah.
if you do come to London, you can just sign straight up for the
It's not a
advanced
big
actor.
world, the stage combat world. Yeah.
No, it's not. And so it's learning how to perform fights on stage or in front of
Hmm.
a screen that tell a physical story,
Yeah.
but it are safe for the actors.
That's the important part. Yes.
So, yeah, I got really into that. I mean, like I said, I was a kid running around playing knights in shining armor. And so started training, did intensive training with the SAFD, and then moved to Italy, started training more intensively with the BSSC. And then
Did you have to go to the UK to do that, or
yeah,
you could do
so
that in Italy?
no, I went to London every summer for about 3 or 4 years.
Wow. Okay.
And then did their teacher training program, which is a 9-month program. So I was commuting to London once a month to do that program. And then completed that in 2014. Is that right? 2014. Yeah. And then immediately ran for vice president, got elected. I was just
Nice.
completing my second term tomorrow. We have our last EC meeting tomorrow where I will
Very
be
cool.
signing off my period as vice president.
Oh, you're leaving.
Well, I've done 2 consecutive terms. So
See.
that's my term limits are up.
That's all you get.
Yeah, which is fine. But that's been a very rewarding experience as well.
That's
And then
awesome.
I've taught at the National Stage Combat Workshop in London, Royal Birmingham School of the Arts. I think that's what it's called. And then done a little bit of stuff in Italy, trying to get some things going in Italy. I actually had a few things lined up in February of last year, and then everything shut down. So we'll see if I can resurrect some of that.
Okay. What are the biggest differences between the American and the British?
So I don't want to offend any of the Americans. I say that like I'm not American. I am American. But the SAFD, to the best of my knowledge, still refers to their exam as the SPT, the Skills Proficiency Test.
Yes, they do. Yes.
Our test is called the FPT, the Fight Performance Test.
Okay.
So we're very interested, obviously, in safety. We're very interested in seeing you have the skill sets, but we really want the story. And so I was actually quite taken aback. My first FPT, like I was like in the UK, I was like, all right, good. We performed all the skills very well. We should get a pass with distinction. And they called me and my partner back in and said, okay, do it again, but I don't want to see your skills. I want to see the story. There was not enough story in that fight. Do it again, do it a little faster, give me more story.
Okay.
And it was like, all right. And so then off we went, and we wound up doing it a little bit faster, and we got a little bit more story, and they gave us a pass with distinction. And that's really, and then as I came to shadow, the master teachers who were also the examiners, like they really all push that story. Like when the sword gets drawn, that's a leveling up of the tension in the situation.
Right.
If you both have swords drawn, but you're standing and you're arguing, but you're standing close to each other.
The distance, yeah.
Then we don't really believe you want to stab that guy.
Yeah.
And lots of emphasis on those things, which, again, I studied with the SAFT in 2004. It might be different now.
Yeah. I mean, in my defense of the Americans, when I took the test, they also put emphasis in the story. I don't know if as much as the British, but they really did. And they made me repeat it because of storyline. So, yes.
Okay, cool. I love the Spaniards defending the Americans and the Americans defending the British. It's a global world.
Makes sense. I mean, this year's all crazy, so... Okay, so when you did your master's, you did your thesis in stage combat and Commedia Dell'Arte.
Yes.
So I would love for you to talk about that. If you could start explaining about Commedia Dell'Arte, because, I don't think most Americans know about what that is.
Sure. So Commedia Dell'Arte is Italian masked Renaissance theater. And a lot of people translate it as the art of comedy, and that is an erroneous translation, because arte in the Renaissance actually refers to a craft, not art, but rather like blacksmiths, the arte del ferro, the arte della pelliccia for leather workers, whatever. Commedia translates not to comedy, but to drama. So Commedia dell'Arte often gets translated as the art of comedy when it really is the craft of drama.
It's all the opposite. Okay.
So, and it was very much tied to, it was a product of its time period. So in the Renaissance, you moved away from a feudal system where you had the king and his serfs and everyone was there, right? And then you had the peasants out in the countryside.
Yes.
As opposed to the Renaissance, where you had the rise of city-states like Florence, Milan, Bologna in Italy, I'm sure Paris. And you had an emergence of a merchant class, because as you brought more people in and you didn't leave your nobles out. If you were king, you didn't leave your nobles out in the country anymore with their own private armies where they could conspire against you, a la Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
Right? You want all the nobles within your city walls where you can keep a sharp eye on them.
Okay.
And you have your army that's professional that you hired, not the conscripts of the nobles out in the countryside. So to supply that increased number of people, then you had the emergence of craftsmen, merchants, right? And the first emergence of a middle class since the fall of the Roman Empire. So you have peasants, instead of peasants and nobles in the medieval era, you had peasants, merchant, working class, nobles, church off to the left.
Okay.
And so Commedia was initially a form of street theater that very much was a contrast between the servants of the nobles and the masters who were the nobles themselves. And it was a very lower class art form, craft, because it was performed in the streets for people on the streets, lampooning the struggles of the servants in the daily lifestyle of their masters.
So the nobles would not watch this theater?
Well, initially, no. But then the nobles kind of got into it because they weren't in it. Because it was too dangerous to make fun of. There's no... So in Commedia dell'Arte, you have the servant characters like Arlecchino, like Pulcinella, and then you have the more noble characters like Il Dottore, Il Capitano, the doctor, the captain, Pantalone, who's like the moneylender, the merchant. And the plays are often, Pantalone's daughter wants to marry Dottore's son, but Pantalone wants her to marry Capitano.
Okay. Is it very stereotyped, right? The characters?
Right. Yeah. So you have these stock characters that could then be adapted, to reflect local culture.
Got it.
But there's no principe, there's no king, there's no bishop, there's no priest, because those are dangerous. You can't make fun of those people.
Right.
You'll get excommunicated or your head will get cut off.
Yeah.
So these troops would perform these shows lampooning the merchant class to the lower classes. And then, of course, you can only perform the same shows so many times before your local audience starts to get bored. So they would start traveling around. Okay. Because they were, passing a hat around at the end of the show. They weren't performing in theaters and they weren't selling tickets. It was just, we're going to get up, we're going to do the show, and then after we're done, pass the hat around. I don't know if you've been to a Renaissance fair in the U.S. But
yes, not in the U.S., but yeah, I have.
Yeah. Very similar in concept. Well, then the nobles started enjoying these because the merchants got wealthier and wealthier, and got more and more money. And they started to get a little bit more powerful, which kings and princes don't really want other people to start getting powerful. I mean, in Florence, you had the Medicis who eventually got so powerful they took over everything. And still today, you have the Antinotis and the Frescobaldis having their wine wars played out all over the world. So the nobles started to really enjoy these shows and start bringing these troops into the courts to perform
for them.
Because this is funny. We can have a laugh at those people we don't really like. We can't get rid of them.
It's not us, so.
But it's not us.
Yeah.
And thus, then it became fashionable and began to grow, and troops could afford to become truly professional troops. And so you had these troops that then became quite well known. The most famous were the Gelosi, and they would travel all over Europe. And you had these stock characters that, while they came out of a very Italian Renaissance tradition, were still applicable
Right.
all over Europe. In France, they had very similar situations. In Spain, and you could take the stock character and adapt it.
Yeah, right.
So Capitano is actually was created in Tuscany, based off of, I can't remember the actor's name. It's in Andrini. Anyway, he'd been in the army, had gone to fight in Turkey, came back, created this braggart captain character that he took from his time being a prisoner in a Turkish prison. And then also Miles Gloriosus, who was an old braggart captain from the Atellan farce of the Roman times.
Yes.
And he kind of put them together and created this Capitan Spavento, this ridiculous captain character.
Got it.
Well, then they go south to Naples, and there was a very large Spanish presence
Okay.
in Naples. So don't be offended. Nobody in the south of Spain was terribly fond of the Spaniards.
I see.
So they started to give Capitano this little Spanish.
Oh, no.
Right?
Okay.
And so that was a way that you could evolve these characters and take them to other places, and then figure out what the social scenario was, and then adapt your stock characters to reflect a bit more the local culture, but still perform the exact same shows.
Were these written plays? Were this improv in it?
No, they were not written down. It was a lot of, and I bought some old manuscript or copies of old manuscripts. Can't afford the actual manuscripts, but they had, the story. It would be the arc of the story. So it would be Pantalone's daughter wants to marry Dottore's son, but
They
Pantalone
give you like
wants her
the
to
plot.
Capitano. This is the plot. This is the arc of the story. And then within that, they would have the various lazzi, which are like bits of comic business, they could say. And then after this happens, Arlecchino and Colombina do the lazzi of the sandwich.
Okay.
Whatever that is.
Okay.
And that wouldn't necessarily be written down. Probably the best example of something similar that you could see that's point of reference is like a Marx Brothers movie.
Got it.
Where there's the story, but you don't actually care about the story. You care about how Harpo and Groucho and Zeppo are gonna get into mischief and do the little comedy bits, like the mirror piece, the Harpo Marx mirror piece.
Yes.
Thing. That's what you're really there for. But obviously that's a 5-minute bit. So you have to make up a movie.
Yes. Right.
That has a story that's kind of engaging.
Yeah.
But the part that actually you remember isn't the plot line of the Marx Brothers. The part you remember is how Groucho and Harpo did this thing, and it was funny.
Yeah, that is a good similarity. Yeah, got it.
So yeah, and those were set. Like that was, but there was space to play. Like if you're doing the lazzi of the sandwich, whatever that is, and it's going really well with the audience, actors would work together and be like,
improvise.
Let's make this go on a little bit longer. Whereas if you do the lazzi of the sandwich and it goes down like a lead balloon,
just get off stage,
cut it, move on.
Got it. Makes sense. Okay.
So none of it. There's no scripts. Well, there were later. Much later. Carlo Goldoni wrote scripts down towards the end of the kind of era of Commedia and actually wrote whole scripts, which is why The Servant of Two Masters is the most famous Commedia show, because he actually wrote the whole thing down.
I see. So nowadays it's not something that's performed or has been adapted to.
No, because it's very, and this is part of what my thesis is about, is it's very much directly a product of its historical time period.
Right. It wouldn't make sense. No,
it doesn't make sense. You can still do Commedia, but you're doing essentially a museum piece, which is fine. In fact, that's what I kind of like to do. But I get into arguments a lot with people like, we're going to make a modern Commedia. I'm like, no, you're not.
Okay.
Because, I mean, in the end, The middle classes got richer and richer, and the nobles kind of, got a little bit weaker and weaker and weaker. And then you had the French Revolution.
Right. Yeah.
And when the French Revolution happens, the middle class storms, the Bastille and takes the nobles and cuts their heads off.
Right. So then you can't do this anymore. Yeah.
Right. And so that storyline of tension between servants and middle class masters has been upended.
Yeah.
And makes no sense anymore.
Yeah.
So that was pretty much the end of Commedia. I mean, Commedia was dwindling in popularity. In fact, Carlo Goldoni wrote whole plays because he said it's gone on too long. It's tired. Okay. People are tired of it. We're going to write the whole script. Here you go, actors. Just perform the script. And then with the kind of ending of that particular period in history, then there was nothing left for the pieces to reference directly anymore.
Okay. So if it's not a thing anymore, someone would argue, why would you, study it so much or in school? So what has it taught you as an actor that you can apply to acting now?
It's that physical storytelling that you can't just rely on getting up on stage and talking. You have to have you have to fully embody the characterization. You have to fully communicate with your whole being what exactly is going on. And that was not something I knew how to do at all. So training in Commedia Dell'Arte, it is an extreme.
Okay.
It's a very highly stylized form of theater.
Yeah.
There's nothing naturalistic there's no Stanislavski in Commedia at all.
For sure, no.
These characters don't think. They react. That's it. And so learning kind of an art form that's the exact polar opposite of what I'd studied growing up doing theater was really, really useful.
It helped you find that middle ground, right?
Find that middle ground. So now I can find the physicality. I still know how to do a beat breakdown. I still know how to psychoanalyze a character, but I also am much more comfortable in creating a body to go along with that character's brain.
Yeah, that's great. And then, but in your thesis, you talked about stage combat in Commedia Dell'Arte.
Yeah. So one of the things I argued was, there were fights in Commedia.
Okay.
And some of them were comedic between servants, but there were also duels to the death between innamorati, the lover characters.
Got it.
We are talking about a theater form that was contemporary to Shakespeare. It was going on at the same time.
Yeah, and they had stage combat, training.
And they had stage combat, and Shakespeare owned a fencing school.
Yes, absolutely, yeah.
And then to take it up a notch, you're performing in front of people who know how to use swords.
Yes.
Right?
So they had to be good. They trained in it.
They had to be good. Like if you're going to get on stage and perform a sword fight in front of a whole bunch of people who actually have been in sword fights.
Yeah.
Then, and you're reliant on them to have liked what you've done so that they're going to get money out of their little satchel and give it to you at the end. You have to make sure every element of their story that you're telling is up to a certain level. So you couldn't get by with clicking two sticks together. That would. In fact, there are stories in Shakespeare or of Elizabethan theater where the coat check comes from they had to start making people check their swords because the fights were so exciting. Audience members would jump on stage and pull their swords out and be like, and join in.
I've never heard that. Wow.
Yeah. So they made people start checking, leave your swords at the door. Here's a number. When the show finishes, come back, get your swords.
Wow. Okay.
So
it was a big thing in Commedia Dell'Arte.
Yeah, it was. And so one of the things I argued was that had to have been something they actually focused on as much as they focused on their individual Lazis and the physical characterizations. Was that the sword fighting had to exist and it had to be good.
And it was a big part of society back then. So
it was a big part of society, and they were doing societal comedy, societal performances.
Yeah. So are there scripts or manuscripts that talk about that stage combat?
No, there are bits where it will say in the arc of the story, they duel. Like in Shakespeare, they fight.
Yeah. But in Shakespeare, we have like scripts and people talking about it, being trained.
Right.
Yeah.
So then in the Commedia manuscript, it would be like, when Capitano finds out that Dottore's daughter is going to marry Pantalone's son, he challenges Pantalone's son to a duel. They duel. Capitano loses. Like that, but that's it.
Right. Okay. Very cool. So before you go, I have 3 quick questions for you.
Sure.
The first one is, give us 3 plays that you love.
Oh man, that's a hard one. Because I just have like 20 different things shoot through my head. So there's the Coast of Utopia trilogy.
Okay. Haven't read that one.
It's by, and now I have to come up with his name. The Servant of Two Masters by Carlo Goldoni. Even though it's a written down commedia, it communicates very well, as best as we have, really, of what a commedia performance is and would have looked like.
It's the best we have. Yeah.
It's the best we've got. And when it's done well, it's thoroughly entertaining and very enjoyable. Also, it's The Coast of Utopia by Tom Stoppard. I can't believe I forgot his name.
Okay. Okay. And a third one?
Third one. I like Assassins, the musical. I love that. I'm not a big musical person, but I actually really enjoy that show. The story, the side of the presidential assassins.
That counts. Okay. Okay, my next one is 2 acting performances that have had an impact on you.
So I would absolutely reference the performance I did with the Baroque troupe in France for that.
Got it.
Very motive I talked about, where it was like, okay, well, I've been studying this physical theater form. Now I'm about to perform in my second language in front of a bunch of people who don't speak either language.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they have to get it because they paid $30, 30 euros a head to be here. So
did they? I never asked.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. No, that was actually, that's the best paying gig I've ever had. Go do theater in France. Wow. Goodness, they treat you so well.
Wow, okay. I'll write it down.
They pay for the travel. They put you up. They feed you really well. There's wine every meal.
I bet. In France, of course.
Yeah. And then the paper performance was also very good. So that was definitely a big one. And then I did a web series called The First Musketeer, where I was like sword fighter number 10, whatever it was. And we were, again, it's in France, so I've had all my best acting work in France. But it was me and a bunch of my fight friends from London just doing sword fights.
That's
and
awesome.
We were hanging out in the south of France, staying in nice houses, and then go to the manor and figure out where we're going to do the fights in the Baroque gardens. You know, which is what I signed up for really when I moved to Europe. I was like, I want to go to Europe and do
eat good food and fight.
Yeah, good food, do mass theater, and play with swords. That's all I've really.
Those are goals for sure.
Hashtag life goals.
And the last one is one thing you would say to your younger self.
But go back and tell him, stick with that ignorant naivete, because it's going to make you brave enough to go do stuff that if you think about it for too long, you're going to scare yourself.
You would never do. Yep, absolutely.
So,
yeah. Okay, thank you so much for sharing all of this great stuff you shared with us. It was very, very helpful.
Thanks for having me. This is my first podcast I've ever been on. So
exciting.
Very happy to have done this. So thank you very much.
Hey guys, it's me back in my studio in LA. So I hope you enjoyed the interview. I know it was very specific to, stage combat and studying in Europe, but I found this whole thing very fascinating and I think different than any guest we've had here at the Actors Vow. We talked about many plays in the interview, so there's not going to be a play of the week. I'm gonna just let you go and remind you to subscribe on iTunes and please leave a review on iTunes. I know a lot of you are listening, so if you're not leaving the reviews and subscribing, it doesn't really help the podcast. So for us to keep doing this podcast and keep meeting every Wednesday and you listening to these amazing guests, I really, really need your help with the reviews on iTunes. And also, please don't forget to follow the Actors Vow on social media, which I know you do. And I love how much you guys are sharing the stuff and interacting there and how much you're enjoying the news things I'm putting up there, like on TikTok. So thank you so much for that. Just a reminder, it's on Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. And next week we have another awesome guest. I'm very excited also to share that guest. Very different from today. It's musical theater. I hope you have an incredible rest of your week, and I will see you next Wednesday.